Have you ever wondered what lies beyond the mists of perception? What nebulous half-truths shall give way to objective fact once the curtain has been pulled? What awaits us upon the dawn of a new age? What is in store for 6.0? So, Final Fantasy XIV's most recent and most successful expansion is coming to a close this year with the release of the as-yet unnamed batch of content that will serve as the game's fourth expansion since its absolutely unprecedented re-release from its disastrous 1.0 as A Realm Reborn. Shadowbringers brought a lot of new blood to the game, with the rave reviews it garnered back when it dropped in July of 2019, myself included. Both the main story and mechanical content of this expansion has served to drive a lot of speculation to where the game might be going next. And having managed to correctly predict a couple of those twists well in advance myself, I thought I'd take a crack at a more structured, and therefore more accountable, list of things I strongly suspect we'll be seeing come 6.0. I'll be dividing this up into two parts. 6 predictions that I believe are more likely to happen than not, and 7 wild guesses that are far closer to educated shots in the dark than substantiated claims. We're going to start off with a bit of a softball. The near certainty of a 4th healing job coming into the game. With the release of Gunbreaker and Dancer in Shadowbringers, every job category, that is to say, tank, healer, melee DPS, ranged physical DPS, and magical DPS, now has at least 3 options to choose from. As a great number of players will no doubt be able to tell you, we are long overdue for an addition to the green plus sign roster, and there have been a number of none too subtle hints that this will be FF14's take on the chemist job. Originally introduced in Final Fantasy V, Chemist was a support and utility-based job that made effective use of consumable items and buffing abilities, rather than serving in a combat capacity within the player's party. While a one-to-one translation of this playstyle wouldn't exactly work in a game that's as light on in-combat consumable usage as FF14 has become, the class fantasy of healer who concocts elixirs and mixes potions on the fly certainly could, and that's why I want to expand this prediction to contain a probable direction for the class to take. Chemist, or as it will more likely be called, Apothecarian, will be one of the new jobs introduced in 6.0. It'll serve as a sort of medium between White Mage and Diurnal Astrologian, being focused on direct HP healing and, most likely, single target buffs, rather than having the direct damage and insane burst healing of a White Mage, or the utility of the 2 Astrologian sects. Furthermore, I predict that Apothecarian will interact with their mana bar in a far different fashion than most current healing jobs do. The Mix command will make many of this class's cooldowns function on an ammo system, with mana being used to reload these available CDs. Finally, given how fond the core writing and directing staff of FF14 are of the world of Ivalice, I also wouldn't be surprised if Apothecarians wind up with firearms as their weapon of choice, like their Final Fantasy Tactics counterparts. If you've been following the events of the main story quest and the Sorrow of Wyrlet quests at all, aka Slimy Orphan Simulator 2020, you'll be more than aware that all signs are pointing strongly towards us finally heading into Ilzabard and taking the fight to the Garleans, or more accurately, what's left of them. There's an ongoing civil war, mysterious Asian tempering towers, and the looming fact that Shadowbringers was actually a big curveball when it came to the direction that the story seemed to be taking prior to the last couple patches in Stormblood. Now that we've had our detour and saved Norvrant, it seems like it's high time we finish our business with the Garleans and Xenos. With that being said, however, there will almost certainly be a secondary plot happening in parallel with our strike at the heart of the Garlean Empire, and I don't think it's just going to be the Tempering Towers. The revelations about the identity of the Warrior of Light make it seem extremely likely that the Azim Steppe and its inhabitants will have at least a moderate role to play in the coming conflict, and with the continued relevance of the Return to Ivalice Alliance raids and fairly prominent current content, we may see another set of previously optional material canonized in much the same way that the Crystal Tower was. Final Fantasy XIV debuted in its current form back in April of 2013. As we begin to close in on the game's 10th anniversary, it's apparent that while Square Enix's quality of life improvements have done an enormous amount to streamline the experience for new players and vets alike, there is still a facet that requires some serious attention: the leveling experience for older jobs. Nearly every job introduced prior to Stormblood has had its ability list revised multiple times. This has led to some cases of extremely muddled class identity prior to hitting level cap, some jobs that are absolutely snooze-inducing below that level cap, and others that simply do not even begin to function like they're intended to below level 60 or so. Given the enormous amount of players coming in due to the reception of Shadowbringers and the quite frankly fantastic decision to expand the free trial to cover all in-game content up through Heavensward, the writing is on the wall for the leveling experience of most older jobs to get a tune-up. Additionally, FF14's design philosophy has changed dramatically between Stormblood and Shadowbringers. All jobs within a given role received a homogenization pass, for better or for worse. One of the biggest positive consequences of this is that there aren't any bad jobs right now. Class balance at the moment is quite frankly excellent at level cap, but there are very serious inconsistencies below that will need to be addressed moving forward. I believe it to be a virtual certainty that we will see further homogenization passes done to give jobs from A Realm Reborn many of the same tools at approximately the same level range as other jobs within that role. This will be doubly necessary given the fact ultimate content will continue to be hard synced down to its originally intended level and item level requirements. Final Fantasy XIV is a flagship game for Square Enix, and a sizable portion of its player base doesn't have much experience or exposure to a number of the older titles in the franchise. This is a shame, not just because they're missing out on some fantastic single-player RPGs, but because Yoshi P & Co. end up using storytelling meta from these previous games to tie in elements of the game's story as it unfolds, as well as foreshadow a large variety of events that may be years away from actually taking place within the realm of Eorzea. If you're familiar with Final Fantasy IV, the first entry of the series released in the Super Nintendo, and in and of itself a perennial classic, you've probably seen the writing on the wall for this one as well. To be succinct, one of the major characters in this game is a dragoon who serves as a thematic template for the job's appearance across the entire franchise. Kain is a stalwart friend of the main character Cecil, but vanishes partway into the game, only to come back at approximately the halfway mark as a villain. However, as the player pushes towards the endgame, it is revealed that he has been controlled by the game's chief antagonist and is freed from their grasp to take his place within the game's final party lineup. While FF14 is its own beast in terms of storytelling, the course of Estinian's arc, and his popularity as a character in conjunction to his existing relationships with the core cast, makes it fairly obvious that we'll be seeing the aloof dragoon coming back into the fold as both a major story NPC in 6.0 and as a much-needed replacement for the melee DPS trust slot left by Rein's departure from the plot. Speaking of, one of the biggest and, quite frankly, most underrated successes of Shadowbringers was the trust system. One of the most difficult aspects of going through the game's main scenario quests is having to wait sometimes as much as an hour to queue for necessary instances. 5.0 sidestepped this problem almost entirely by introducing the trust system, granting players the ability to immediately enter major dungeons with a party of plot-important NPCs filling in around them. This allows the Scions to take a far more active role in the story itself, and greatly contributed to the fantastic pacing of the Shadowbringers MSQ. It's practically a given that we'll see the trust system continue to be implemented in 6.0, but I think it's also extremely likely that we see this system applied to a variety of older content as well. This expansion has served as a sort of beta test for a set of systems that was initially introduced with the Grand Company Squadron back in Stormblood. But the popularity and utility of allowing players to tackle these dungeons at their own pace, and the ability to put the controller down during them if need be, has been another strong contribution to the new player experience that has been a clear focus during post-launch updates to Shadowbringers. I would suspect for an expanded trust system to use some of the background characters within the Scions to assist with older side content in much the same way Grand Company Squadrons work, and that we may even see systems put in place that allow players to tackle trials as well. This particular prediction falls almost within the purview of wild guessing, but I think there's enough substantiated evidence for it to pass the threshold of reasonable possibility that I set for myself here. As of the time this video releases, patch 5.4, we have received several major hints that the story is going to be taking this direction moving forward. First, the emotional climax prior to your battle with Hades crescendos with Ardbert becoming the 8th fragment of your character's soul to be rejoined to them, and granting them the power to overcome an unsundered Ascian's might. I believe it's reasonable to assume that Emet-Selch wasn't playing hardball with the Warrior of Light during the dying gasp, given that the extreme version of that trial is so extra in terms of mechanics and presentation, combined with his timely interlude to save you from space jail during the Seat of Sacrifice. That being said, the displayed proof of your might and resolve was enough to win the former Convocation members' trust in your ability to carry on and save the world. That being said, the conflicts presented at the end of 5.3 and during 5.4's MSQ give serious credence to the notion that Stormblood's Garlean psychopath / thirst magnet Xenos Ye Galvus has managed to attain an artificially rejoined soul. Fan Daniel's comments on him being completed are extremely alarming, since the Sephiroth X-Spy will stop at nothing to be best murder buddies with the Warrior of Light. While a fully rejoined soul is not necessarily a perfect measure of power, Emet-Selch remarks that La Habrea was weakened to the point of basically jobbing by unsundered standards, courtesy of his constant body hopping, the Warrior of Light will certainly have to figure out a means to counteract this difference in raw might. Considering that they now have access to the Azim's crystal and its ability to call warriors from across the rift, well, it seems far from impossible that the scattered fragments of your character's soul may come back to them when they need it most. With those 6 predictions lined up, I hope that I've at least got you thinking about what kinds of things we may be seeing in this coming expansion. Speaking of expansion, I hope you'll look forward to the follow-up to this video when we blow far past reasonable conclusions and chart the vast, unknown reaches of partially educated guessing and wild-eyed shots in the dark.